The wind howled like a wild beast, tearing across the rocky desert of the alien planet. Jake pulled his jacket tight, his face stinging from the sharp dust flying through the storm. His ship had crashed days ago, and he'd been walking since then. Searching for help or shelter, food was low, water almost gone. And the storm was growing worse. He couldn't call for rescue, the signal was jammed. And the skies were full of interference. As he climbed a steep hill of black rock, something strange caught his attention through the screaming wind. He heard a sound. It was soft, almost like a whimper, a cry, faint but real. Jake stopped, turning his head slowly, holding his breath. There it was again, a small voice, shaking. Afraid, coming from a cave nearby, hidden behind sharp rocks. Without thinking, Jake moved toward it. The opening was narrow and dark, just wide enough for one person to crawl inside. He had no idea what might be in their beasts, poisonous plants or worse, but the cry came again, weaker this time. Jake crawled in without hesitation. The cave was cold and smelled like wet stone. He turned on the small light on his wrist. The beam cut through the darkness, and there, curled in a corner, was a small figure. She was no more than 6 or 7 years old, but clearly not human. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light, and her hair shimmered like silver silk. She wore torn clothes covered in dirt and blood. Her eyes, large and glowing, watched him with terror. Jake raised his hands slowly. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." The alien girl flinched and backed away, but she didn't scream. She just watched, shaking like a leaf. Jake reached into his pack and pulled out a protein bar. He unwrapped it and placed it on the ground between them. Then he sat down, keeping his hands away from his body. Minutes passed. Then she crawled forward, sniffed the bar, and slowly began to eat. Tears streamed down her face as she chewed. Jake's heart ached. "What are you doing here, all alone?" he whispered. Of course, she didn't understand English, but she tilted her head like she was trying to figure out his words. Then she did something strange. She pointed to her chest and said in a soft, broken voice, "Luma." Jake blinked. "Luma," he repeated. She nodded, then pointed at him. "Curious, Jake," he said, placing his hand on his chest. "Jake," she repeated in her soft voice. A small smile formed on her face for the first time. But before Jake could say anything more, a sharp sound echoed from outside, a metallic shriek, followed by a heavy thud. Something was out there. Luma froze, her eyes wide in fear. She backed into the wall and covered her mouth with both hands. Jake turned off his light and crawled to the cave's entrance through the blowing sand. He saw a large shadow moving tall, with glowing red eyes. It scanned the rocks, its head twisting unnaturally, a search drone. A hunter. Jake ducked down, heart racing. Whatever it was looking for her, not him. The shadow moved closer to the cave. Jake turned to Luma and gestured for her to stay quiet. She nodded fast, her little hands trembling. The creature stood right outside the cave now. Jake held his breath, hand gripping the small survival blade at his waist. But then, the creature paused, sniffed the air, and turned away. It walked off into the storm, vanishing into the dust. Jake didn't move until 5 whole minutes passed. Then he let out a slow breath and crawled back to Luma. She was still huddled in the corner, crying silently. Jake knelt down beside her. "It's okay now," he said softly. "You're safe." She looked at him, and after a moment, crawled into his arms. Jake held her gently, shocked by how light she was. She felt like a fragile bird made of light and fear. He looked around the dark cave and knew one thing. This girl didn't end up here by accident. Someone had left her. Someone powerful was hunting her, and now? Jake had just stepped into something much, much bigger than he understood. but he wasn't walking away. Not now. Not after hearing her cry. Not after hearing her call herself Luma. The cave stayed quiet for hours. Outside, the wind still howled. But inside, Jake and Luma sat together in the darkness. She was asleep now, curled beside him. Her breathing soft and steady. Jake had wrapped her in his jacket, even though he was cold himself. He kept one hand on the handle of his knife, just in case that thing came back. But his eyes kept going to her arm. Earlier, when she moved, he saw something glowing faintly beneath her torn sleeve. Now, with the storm outside and nothing to do but wait, he gently pulled the sleeve back, his breath caught. There was a mark glowing softly, like a tattoo made of light. It was shaped like a circle with 3 lines cutting through it. Strange symbols surrounded the shape, slowly shifting and pulsing like they were alive. Jake had never seen anything like it, not even in alien tech files back at the outpost. As he watched, the mark reacted to him. It pulsed brighter, and Luma stirred in her sleep. Jake pulled his hand back. Startled, Luma opened her eyes and looked up at him. She saw his gaze on the mark, then looked at her arm. Slowly, she sat up and covered it with her hand, as if ashamed. "Bad," she whispered. Her voice was small, broken, but the word was clear. "Bad." Jake frowned. "No, not bad," he said softly. "You're not bad." Luma shook her head. Eyes filling with tears, she touched the mark and whispered again. "Mother, gone. Hunters come." Jake didn't understand all the words, but he caught enough to feel a cold chill run down his spine. Her mother was gone, and now hunters were after her because of that mark. Before he could ask more, a sound from outside made him freeze. Not the storm, not wind, a mechanical hum, soft. But rising, Jake crawled to the cave's mouth and peeked out. There it was, a drone, sleek and black, hovering just above the rocks. Red light scanning the ground like a laser eye. It was getting closer. It moved with precision, silent but deadly. Not a rescue drone, not human tech. Something alien, something dangerous. Jake turned back to Luma. "We need to move," he whispered. He packed the last of his supplies and helped her crawl out the back of the cave. There was a narrow crack between the rocks tight, but maybe just big enough. Jake squeezed through, pulling Luma with him. The moment they got out, he pulled her into a narrow trench and ducked. The drone passed overhead seconds later. Scanning the cave entrance, it hovered there, unmoving. As if trying to smell them, Luma held her breath, clinging to Jake like a scared animal. Then the drone turned, fired a small flash of red light into the cave, and vanished into the storm. It hadn't found them, but now it knew she was close. Jake let out a slow breath. He turned to Luma and whispered, "They're really after you, huh?" She nodded slowly, her glowing eyes full of fear. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small map display. They were still 30 kilometers from the nearest research station, too far to walk with a child through the storm. Unless, Vanny remembered. Old abandoned outpost used by survey teams, not much power. But maybe shelter and a working console. He pointed at the map and said, "We go here, okay?" Luma didn't answer, but when he stood, she held out her hand. He took it. Her fingers were small and glowing, warm despite the cold. She trusted him now. Together, they moved through the storm. Sand cutting their faces, wind pushing them back. But Jake kept going, holding her close, shielding her from the worst. She didn't cry anymore. She just walked, quiet and brave. Beside him, hours passed, finally, through the dust. The shape of a ruined building appeared, metal walls. Broken roof, but still standing. Jake kicked the door open and pulled her inside. It was dark, but dry. Safer now. Inside, he found an old console and powered it up. Static filled the screen, then flickered into life. A faded log entry blinked. Subject, Luma, daughter of High Matron Sarayana. Status: missing, search ongoing. Caution: Mark's child, do not approach without clearance. Alert: matron unstable. Destroyed 2 colonies during search. Jake stared at the screen in shock. She wasn't just any child. She was the daughter of someone powerful, someone dangerous. He turned to Luma, who stood silently behind him. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Mother? Looking for me." Jake swallowed hard. "She's looking for you," he said softly, "and others are trying to get to you first." The glowing mark on her arm pulsed again, brighter now, as if it had heard everything. Jake stood slowly. "Well, Luma," he said, "looks like you've got a big story, and I just walked into it." He smiled down at her. "But don't worry, I'm not leaving you." Outside, the storm roared louder. Inside, Jake reached for his weapon and whispered, "Let them come." The old outpost was quiet, but it felt like it held secrets in its walls. Jake sat beside the dusty console, staring at the blinking message. Daughter of High Matron Sarayana. Do not approach without clearance. Matron unstable. The words circled in his mind, so the little girl Lumi was not just some runaway child. She was royalty. Her mother had destroyed colonies just looking for her. Jake looked at Luma, who was now sitting in the corner, trying to fix a broken toy she had found. She looked so innocent, so small, but she carried something big, something dangerous. He didn't know who this Sarayana really was, but anyone with the power to burn down colonies just to find a child. That wasn't just a mother. That was someone powerful and desperate. Jake checked the console again. The logs were old, most damaged. But one entry still worked. It was a video file. He hesitated, then played it. A female alien appeared on the screen, tall, glowing silver skin, eyes sharp like a queen. Her voice was calm, but her words were full of fury. "My daughter was taken from me. If she is not returned, I will turn this sector to ash. Bring her back, or fall." Jake leaned back slowly. That was Sarayana, Luma's mother. Her voice sounded like thunder trapped in honey. Beautiful, but dangerous. "Guess I'm in the middle of a royal crisis," he muttered. Luma looked up, blinking. She stood and walked over, holding the broken toy out to him. Jake smiled and took it. "I'll try to fix it later," he said, "but right now, we need to move." He didn't trust the outpost's location anymore. If someone sent that drone earlier, more were coming. He checked the map again. Another human station was 3 days away through the canyon. It was a gamble, but better than staying still. As he packed supplies, Luma stood beside him and said softly, "Mom, mad?" Jake paused. He looked at her carefully. "She's loud," he said, trying to find the right word, "but she's looking for you, right?" Luma nodded, but her eyes looked unsure. "She hurt many. When I gone, she touched the mark on her arm again. Mark. Makes her angry." Jake knelt in front of her. "Is that why you ran away?" Luma didn't answer, but she hugged him tightly, and that told Jake enough. She wasn't just lost. She ran from her own mother, from the throne, from whatever that glowing mark meant. Jake lifted her into his arms. "Okay, kid," he whispered. "Let's get you somewhere safe. And maybe figure this out." He stepped out of the outpost and into the red morning light. The storm had cleared, but the sky still looked angry. The sand shifted beneath his boots as he began to walk toward the canyon. Luma rode quietly on his back, her head resting on his shoulder. Midday came, and Jake spotted movement behind them. Fast, flying low, another drone. He ducked under a rocky ledge and waited, holding his breath. It flew past, scanning, but this one was different. It wasn't searching for her. It was broadcasting something. Jake watched as the drone paused in midair and played a message: "To the human who holds my daughter. This is Sarayana. Bring her to me. She is mine. I will not harm you, but delay. And I will. Luma gasped softly and buried her face in Jake's shoulder. Her body trembled. Jake stood still. Staring at the sky, he whispered to her, "I won't give you to anyone you're afraid of, okay?" She looked at him, unsure. "You? Protect." Jake nodded. "Even if she's a queen." That night, they found shelter in a small cave. Jake lit a small fire, using what little fuel he had. Luma curled beside him, her fingers still holding onto his jacket. Jake looked at the stars above. He wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into. A war between aliens, a glowing mark, and now a queen demanding her child back. But one thing he was sure of, he wasn't letting this little girl go. Not until he understood everything. She had called herself lost, but now she was found. And even if her mother was a force of nature, Jake was just stubborn enough to stand against her, because sometimes a child's trust is worth more than any throne. And this girl, this glowing little alien, had chosen him. The stars blinked above the canyon as Jake stared into the fire. Luma was asleep, curled beside him, her small hand still clutching his jacket. She trusted him now, and that scared him more than the drones or the desert. She had run from her mother, a queen feared across entire sectors. And now, Jake was all she had. The next morning, the air changed. No wind. No sounds, not even the usual hum of bugs. Just a strange stillness. Jake noticed it as soon as he woke up. His instincts screamed at him, "Something is coming." He packed quickly, slung his gear on his back, and gently lifted Luma. But before they could leave the cave, the sky outside turned silver. A deep, humming vibration filled the air, like an engine far too large to be real. Jake stepped to the mouth of the cave and froze. Hovering above the canyon was a ship, huge, silent and glowing with soft blue light. It wasn't human-made, not even close. The surface shimmered like liquid glass, and the engines made no noise at all. This was alien royalty, no doubt. Then the bottom of the ship opened. A platform lowered slowly to the ground. On it stood a tall figure, motionless but commanding. She stepped down barefoot on the dust like a goddess returning to earth. Jake felt the air shift, his heart pounded. Even without introduction, he knew exactly who she was. Seraya. Nah. She was tall, elegant, with skin that shimmered like silver under sunlight. Her eyes glowed a pale white, calm yet terrifying. She wore no armor, no crown, only a flowing robe made of something that moved like mist, and behind her followed silent guards, faces hidden beneath glowing helms. Jake stepped forward, blocking the cave behind him. He kept Luma out of sight. His voice was steady, but quiet. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I didn't know who she was when I found her." Seriana's eyes locked onto his. Then, without moving, she spoke. Her voice echoed in the air. Not loud, but filled with power. "You are the one who sheltered my daughter." It wasn't a question. Jake nodded slowly. She was cold. "Scared and alone," he said. She cried. "I helped her." The queen took one step forward. Jake gripped the knife at his side, even though he knew it was useless. But Seriana stopped. She raised one hand, not in anger, but peace. "I saw her cries," she said softly. "Even across galaxies, I felt her pain." Her voice trembled for just a moment, but she did not want to be found. Jake glanced behind him. Luma peeked out from the cave, her glowing eyes wide with fear. The moment Seriana saw her, everything changed. The powerful queen, ruler of fleets, feared across systems, dropped to her knees. Tears spilled from her silver eyes. "Luma," she whispered, "my star, my light." Luma hesitated, then slowly walked forward. Her tiny feet moved across the dusty ground until she stood in front of her mother. But she didn't run into her arms. Instead, She pointed back at Jake, and in a small voice, she said, "Safe." With him, Seriana looked up slowly. The wind stirred her robe, her silver hair floating in the air like threads of light. "You kept her warm when I could not," she said to Jake. "You gave her safety when all I brought was fear." Jake didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. Then Seriana stood again. She walked slowly to Jake and looked into his eyes. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then she said, "In my people's law, when a royal child bonds with another in times of crisis, that bond is sacred." She looked down at Luma, who nodded slowly. "She chose you," Seriana whispered, "and I must accept what she has chosen." Jake's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Seriana stepped closer. "I searched across stars, destroyed enemies, abandoned treaties. All for my daughter." Her voice shook again, but she found peace with you. She reached out. It's not to strike, not to take, but to offer. In our culture, the one who protects the child becomes family. Jake blinked. "You mean, like adoption?" Seriana's eyes softened. "In your words." "Yes." Then, after a pause, she added, "But not only the child," she stepped even closer. "It means me, too." Jake's heart skipped. "Whitar, you sang?" She nodded. "You saved my daughter. You healed her heart." She placed her glowing hand on his chest. "Now, by our law, I offer myself as well." Behind them, Luma smiled and took both their hands, a silent bridge between two worlds, and just like that, Jake realized the rescue was just the beginning. Now came a choice, one that could change everything. Jake sat in silence as the Queen's words echoed in his mind. He had saved Luma. Now Seriana, the powerful alien mother, stood before him, offering not just thanks, but herself. He stared at her, unsure what to say. She wasn't just beautiful. She was radiant. Her eyes held a storm and a softness. She looked like a goddess, but she spoke like a mother who had once been broken. "I don't understand," Jake finally whispered. "You're saying I'm supposed to be what? Your mate?" Seriana nodded gently. "In our culture, when someone protects a royal child with no blood bond, the guardian may be accepted into the royal line." Her voice was calm, but serious. "Luma has chosen you. That means I must accept your challenge, her choice." Jake looked down at Luma. She stood holding both their hands, eyes glowing. She trusted him more than anything. And that trust had awakened something ancient in her people's law. But Jake still had questions. "I don't want to offend you," he said carefully. "But what if I say no?" Seriana didn't blink. "Then I release you," she said. "No war, no anger. You may walk free." Then her voice softened. "But you will break her heart. And mine." Jake looked at Luma again. Her small fingers gripped his hand tighter. Her lips trembled. "I want family," she whispered. "You are family." Jake's throat tightened. This wasn't about romance. It was about a bond built through fear, protection, and quiet love. He knelt down and touched Luma's face. "You really want me to stay?" She nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she smiled. "Please," Seriana spoke again. "Before you decide, our tradition requires one last step." She turned toward her ship and gestured. "You must pass the trial of the heart." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trial?" Seriana's eyes glowed slightly. "It's not a fight. It's truth." She turned back to him. "You will enter a sacred space. It will show you your own heart, your pain, your past, your love. If you are false, it will reject you." Jake hesitated. This sounded strange, maybe even dangerous. But somehow, deep down, he wanted to do it. Not for glory, not for love, but for Luma. He had come this far. He wouldn't run now. "I'll do it," he said. Standing tall, Seriana nodded once. Follow me. She led him onto the floating platform, Luma in her arms. The guards remained behind. Silent as shadows, the ship lifted them gently into the air. Inside was not metal and wires, but soft light, floating crystals, and music that played without sound. Jake looked around in awe. It didn't feel like a ship. It felt like a dream. They entered a chamber. Made of swirling mist, Seriana stepped back. You must go alone, she said. If your heart is true, it will open. If not, it will cast you out. Jake nodded and stepped forward. The mist closed around him, and suddenly he was elsewhere. He stood in a forest, Earth's forest. It was his childhood. He heard his mother calling, saw his old house in the distance. Then the scene changed. His military base, the explosions, the screams. Then the crash's ship, falling through the alien sky. The images weren't real, but they felt real. They showed his past, his regrets, all his failures, all the people he'd lost. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, but then a soft hand touched his face. He looked up. Luma stood there, glowing in the mist. She smiled and said, "You're not alone." The storm in his heart eased. He stood again, and the mist faded. When he stepped out of the chamber, Seriana was waiting. She looked at him with soft, knowing eyes. You passed, she said quietly. You faced yourself. You held nothing back. The heart chose you. Luma ran forward and hugged him. Jake held her close, and for the first time, he felt something strange. Not fear, not duty, but belonging. Seriana stepped forward and placed her hand on his shoulder. I will not force you to stay, she said, but if you choose us, you will never be alone again. Jake looked at Luma. She smiled through happy tears. He looked at Seriana, the warrior queen who had shown him not just power, but deep, quiet love. He took a deep breath and said, I'm not going anywhere. Jake stood on the platform of the alien ship, the wind brushing against his face. Behind him, the silver-skinned queen, Seriana, watched quietly, and beside him, Lumaher's small hand wrapped around his fingers smiled with trust only a child could give. He had passed the trial of the heart. He had seen his memories, his pain, his fears, his guilt, but also the good he had done. And somehow, that strange mist had judged him worthy. Now, things were different. Jake wasn't just a human wanderer anymore. He was something else, something connected to two lives that had once been strangers to him. He looked at Seriana and said softly, I didn't come here looking for this. Seriana nodded slowly. Nor did I, she replied. But sometimes the heart decides for us. The ship took off gently, flying above the canyon and the sandstorms. Inside, it felt peaceful. Jake walked through the halls with Luma's hand in his. She showed him glowing walls that responded to her voice, doors that opened like flower petals, a room where lights danced like fireflies when she laughed. This was her world, and now, in a strange way, it was his too. That night, Seriana invited him to dine with her. The table was simple but elegant, with fruits that shimmered and drinks that tasted like light. Jake sat stiffly at first, unsure how to act around a queen. But Seriana laughed softly. You don't need to bow, she said. You protected what I love most. That is worth more than formality. Luma giggled between bites of glowing fruit. Jake relaxed a little. Still, the question hung in his mind. So, what happens now? He asked carefully. Seriana tilted her head, her silver hair falling like silk. Now we return to my homeworld, she said. There the elders must see you. They must recognize the bond or challenge it. Jake blinked. Challenge it. Like, fight me. She shook her head. No, not with weapons. With words, with old laws. But if the bond holds, no one will deny it. Jake took a slow sip. of the glowing drink and stared at his reflection. He looked tired, confused, but also changed. This wasn't just about staying with Luma. This was becoming something more, part of an alien family, part of a royal legacy, and maybe something deeper. Later that night, Jake sat in the small sleeping quarters given to him. He watched the stars from the wide, clear window. Then there was a knock, soft and gentle. The door opened, and Sarayana stepped inside. She wasn't wearing the glowing robe this time, just a simple dress, light and quiet. No crown, no guards. Just a mother, just a woman. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said softly. Jake shook his head. "No, not at all." She stepped closer, eyes warm, but uncertain. "I came to thank you." Jake stood awkwardly. "You already did," he replied. "More than enough." She smiled faintly. "No, this is different." She looked away for a moment, then spoke again. "4 cycles, I searched. I burned. I destroyed. I became something cold." Her voice shook just slightly. "But you held my daughter with warmth. You gave her kindness when all I gave was war." Jake didn't know what to say. He wasn't a hero. He had just followed his heart. When he saw a scared little girl in a cave, anyone would have, right? But Sarayana stepped closer. "You gave her peace," she said, "and in doing so, you gave it to me too." She reached out and touched his hand. "Luma calls you family. I do not take that lightly." Jake stared at her. Her touch was soft, but strong. He felt the heat of her skin, the silent energy that lived inside her. Not the queen, not the warrior. Just Sarayana, the mother who had suffered. "I never asked for this," he whispered. "Neither did I." She answered. They stood in silence, the stars watching through the glass. Then Sarayana did something he didn't expect. She leaned in and gently rested her forehead against his. In her culture, it was the beginning of a bond, not of passion, but of trust. "You may leave any time," she said softly, "but if you stay, we begin a new life. One built not on law, but on choice." Jake took a breath. He thought of Earth, of empty bunks and orders, of silence after missions, of no one waiting for him. And then he thought of Luma's laugh, of her tiny hands holding his, of Sarayana's tears when she saw her daughter again. He gently closed his eyes and whispered, "I think I'm already home." The ship drifted into orbit above the royal homeworld, giant blue-green planet with silver clouds and crystal oceans. It sparkled like a jewel in the blackness of space. Jake stood by the window, Luma on his shoulders, her arms wrapped around his forehead, giggling. Sarayana walked in, dressed once again in her queenly robe, glowing softly, but her smile was warm, human, almost. "You've made her laugh more in 2 days than I have in 2 years, she said quietly. Jake turned a little embarrassed. "She's easy to love." He replied, "So are you," she said back, and then walked past him before he could answer. The landing platform was huge, full of guards and watchers. Tall alien figures bowed deeply as Sarayana stepped off the ship. Jake followed with Luma holding his hand this time. He could feel all eyes on him. Whispers moved through the crowd. "That's the human. The one she chose, the protector. The one from the trial." They entered the Hall of Heartstone, an ancient room made from crystal walls that hummed softly. Elders sat in a circle, old and wise, wearing robes of deep blue and violet. Their eyes glowed like fireflies, calm and knowing. Sarayana stood tall before them, her voice proud but respectful. "I bring before you the one who saved my child, who passed the trial of the heart, who was chosen by Luma, and now accepted by me, an elder with white skin." Like marble leaned forward. "We have seen this human," he said. "We have seen the bond, but now he must speak." Jake stepped forward slowly. He didn't have fancy words, no speech prepared. so he just spoke from his heart. I didn't plan any of this, he said. I found a scared little girl in a cave. I helped her because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted reward or honor. He looked at Luma. She made me feel needed, and then her mother showed me something I didn't think I'd ever find again. Family. He paused, then added, I don't know all your rules, but I know this. I'll protect them with everything I have. The elders were silent for a long moment. Then the eldest among them stood and raised one hand. The Heartstone accepts him, the elder said. The bond is true. A wave of soft music filled the room as the crystals around them glowed. Light bathed over Jake, Sariana, and Luma, wrapping them in warm color. It was done. They were family now officially, forever. Later, as the sun began to set, across the high towers of the palace, Jake stood on a balcony, looking over a city made of light and song. Sariana joined him, her voice quiet. You passed their judgment. Jake smiled. I was more afraid of them than the drone that almost killed me. She laughed. You've proven yourself, she said. But now comes the real challenge. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's that? She leaned against the rail beside him. Being part of someone else's world, and still keeping your own heart alive. Jake thought about that. He was a human in an alien land. He didn't know the customs, the language, the politics, but when he looked inside, he didn't feel lost anymore, because he wasn't alone, eh? Small hand tugged at his sleeve. It was Luma, wearing a royal dress and a flower crown made by hand. She held up her arms. Jake lifted her easily. She kissed his cheek and whispered, Don't leave, okay? Jake hugged her tight. Never. Sariana placed her hand on both of them. A family formed by fate, sealed by choice. That night, a celebration filled the city. Lights floated in the air. Music echoed from the towers, and in the center of it all stood the human Jake, the protector who came from the stars. The stranger who became a father, the warrior who found a queen not through battle, but through kindness. When someone asked later, how did it happen? Jake always smiled and said, I just followed a cry in a cave, and found everything I never knew I needed.